In the marble halls of Chicago's federal courthouse, Judge Celeste Warren has built an unshakable reputation for fairness and integrity. At 30, she's one of the youngest judges on the bench, having fought her way to the top through determination and brilliance. But when a high-profile securities fraud case lands on her docket, she discovers the defendant is Julian Cross, the man who shattered her heart 7 years ago by walking away without explanation. Now she must choose between recusing herself and facing the ghosts of a love that nearly destroyed her, all while the media watches and her professional ethics hang in the balance. Before we start this story, comment below from where you are watching us. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Judge Celeste Warren's downtown Chicago apartment. At 30 years old, she was one of the youngest judges ever appointed to the bench, and she never took that responsibility lightly. Celeste adjusted her black robe in front of the mirror and took a deep breath. Her dark brown eyes stared back at her with determination. As a black woman in a system that hadn't expected her to succeed, she'd fought twice as hard to get where she was. Another day, another chance to make a difference, she said to herself, smoothing her braided hair that was pulled back into a neat bun. Her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant, Marie. "Morning, Judge Warren. Reminder that the Cross Securities fraud case starts today. Files are on your desk." Celeste frowned. Cross? It couldn't be. Chicago was a big city with plenty of people sharing the same last name. She pushed the thought away as she grabbed her briefcase and headed out the door. In the courthouse hallway, Celeste nodded to the security guards who greeted her with respect. At first, many had mistaken her for a lawyer or even a defendant. Now, 3 years into her appointment, everyone knew exactly who she was. "Morning, Judge Warren," said Bill, the bailiff assigned to her courtroom. "Today's docket is packed. That securities fraud case has the press all worked up." "I heard," she replied. "Let's make sure security is tight." In her chambers, Celeste flipped through the case file. The defendant was a millionaire investor charged with insider trading and securities fraud. She scanned the documents until she reached the name, Julian Cross. Her heart stopped. The coffee mug in her hand froze halfway to her lips. "It can't be," she whispered, but the birth date confirmed it. This was her Julian, her first love, the man who had walked away from her 7 years ago without so much as a goodbye. Memories flooded back as she sat at her desk, her hand trembling slightly. "We're going to change the world together," Julian had said, his arm around her as they sat on the grass outside the law school library. "You'll be the youngest Supreme Court justice in history, and I'll be the attorney who argues the most important cases of our generation." Celeste smiled, leaning into his warmth. "Promise me we'll always have each other's backs." "I promise you forever," Julian said, kissing her forehead. "Nothing will ever come between us." That was before his restlessness took over, before he dropped out of law school in their final year, before he took what he called a shortcut to success. "Law takes too long," he'd explained, packing his books. "I've got an opportunity to make real money now, Celeste. We can have everything we ever wanted." "I didn't want money," she'd argued. "I wanted us to build something meaningful together." The fight that followed was their last conversation. The next day he was gone. No note, no call, just empty drawers in their shared apartment and a half-paid rent check on the counter. "Judge Warren?" Marie's voice brought her back to the present. "They're ready for you in the courtroom." Celeste closed the file. Legally, she should recuse herself. There was no question about it. Her past relationship with the defendant created a clear conflict of interest, but something stopped her. This case was high profile. The press was watching. Walking away now would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer, and deeper down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, was a need to look him in the eye, to show him what he had thrown away. "I'll be right there," she said, gathering her composure. The courtroom fell silent as she entered. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but sketch artists sat ready to capture every moment for the evening news. Celeste took her seat at the bench, her face a perfect mask of judicial impartiality. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Celeste Warren," Bill announced. As the crowd stood, Celeste allowed herself to look at the defense table for the first time, and there he was. Julian Cross looked different than she remembered. His boyish charm had hardened into something more refined. His once wild curls were now expertly cut, framing a face that had grown sharper with age. The cheap suits he'd worn in law school had been replaced by what was clearly a custom-tailored ensemble worth thousands. But his eyes, those deep hazel eyes, were exactly the same, and right now they were wide with shock as they locked with hers. For one heartbeat, the world disappeared. It was just the two of them, staring across a sea of shared history and broken promises. Then Celeste blinked, and she was a judge again. Nothing more, nothing less. "Be seated," she said, her voice steady and professional. "We are here today for case number 47329, the State versus Julian Cross." The prosecutor, Sandra Mills, stood. "Your Honor, the State charges Mr. Cross with 3 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of insider trading. We are prepared to show evidence that the defendant knowingly used privileged information to manipulate stock prices, resulting in millions of dollars of profit for himself and substantial losses for other investors." Celeste nodded. "And how does the defendant plead?" Julian's attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit who Celeste recognized as one of the top defense lawyers in the city, stood up. "Not guilty, Your Honor." But it was Julian who caught her attention. He hadn't taken his eyes off her. There was something in his gaze. Surprise, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like relief. "Mr. Cross," Celeste said, addressing him directly, "do you understand the charges against you?" Julian stood, buttoning his jacket. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered. "I understand completely." The formality between them felt surreal. 7 years ago they had shared a bed, a home, and plans for a future. Now they were judge and defendant, separated by law and protocol. "Very well," Celeste continued. "We'll begin with opening statements. Ms. Mills, you may proceed." As the prosecutor began outlining the case, Celeste noticed Julian leaning over to whisper something to his attorney. The lawyer shook his head firmly, but Julian insisted. After a brief, heated exchange, the attorney sighed and stood up. "Your Honor, before we proceed, may I approach the bench?" Celeste nodded and both lawyers came forward. "Your Honor," Julian's attorney said quietly, "my client has just informed me of a personal history between the two of you. He believes you may have known each other some years ago." Celeste's heart raced, but her face remained impassive. "Mr. Davidson, are you suggesting I should recuse myself from this case?" "That would be the standard procedure, Your Honor," Sandra Mills interjected. But before either lawyer could say more, Julian spoke up from the defense table, his voice carrying across the courtroom. "If I may, Your Honor," he said, standing again, "I have no objection to you presiding over this case. In fact, I prefer it." His attorney turned, horrified. "Mr. Cross, I strongly advise against—" "If anyone should judge me," Julian continued, his eyes fixed on Celeste, "it should be Judge Warren." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Celeste tapped her gavel once, and silence fell again. "Mr. Davidson, control your client," she said firmly. "This is not how my courtroom operates." Davidson hurried back to the defense table, clearly frustrated. Celeste took a moment to consider her options. The right thing to do was clear. She needed to recuse herself, but Julian's words echoed in her mind. If anyone should judge me, it should be Judge Warren. What game was he playing? Was this some kind of manipulation? Or did he genuinely want her to be the one to decide his fate? "Counsel, approach the bench again," she ordered. When both lawyers stood before her, she spoke in a hushed tone. "I will take this matter under advisement overnight. We'll resume tomorrow morning with my decision on whether I will continue to preside over this case. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow." With a bang of her gavel, she stood and walked briskly to her chambers, feeling Julian's eyes on her back the entire way. Once alone, Celeste slumped into her chair, her composure finally cracking. 7 years of building walls around her heart, of becoming the unshakable, untouchable Judge Warren, and in one moment, seeing Julian's face had brought it all rushing back. The phone on her desk rang. It was Marie. "Judge, there's someone from the defense team asking to speak with you privately. He says it's urgent." Celeste knew exactly who it was, and she knew exactly what she should say. "Tell him." She paused, her professional ethics warring with the part of her that had never stopped wondering why he left. "Tell him I'll give him 5 minutes. Not as a judge, but as a courtesy to an old acquaintance." As she waited, Celeste stared at the photograph on her desk. It showed her on the day of her judicial appointment, beaming with pride, her mother standing beside her. She had achieved everything she'd ever wanted professionally. So why did seeing Julian make her feel like she was still that heartbroken law student, watching her future walk out the door? There was a knock, and then he was there, standing in her doorway. The years melted away, and for a moment she saw the boy she had loved, brilliant, ambitious, with a smile that could charm anyone. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man charged with crimes that represented everything she fought against on the bench. "Hello, Celeste," Julian said softly. "That's Judge Warren in this building." She corrected him. her voice cold. Julian nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Judge Warren," he amended, "I know this is inappropriate, but I needed to see you, to explain. 7 years too late for explanations, don't you think?" She stood, needing the height of her desk between them. "And completely irrelevant to the charges against you." "The charges—" Julian started, then shook his head. "I won't deny I've done things I'm not proud of, but seeing you today, it feels like fate." Celeste laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "Fate? You're charged with serious crimes, and by coincidence you end up in my courtroom. That's not fate, that's bad luck." "I don't see it that way," Julian said, taking a step closer. "When I saw you today, I realized something. You're the only person who ever truly knew me, the real me, before money changed everything." "I don't know you anymore," Celeste replied. "The Julian I knew wanted to help people, not defraud them." Pain flashed across his face. "I lost my way," he admitted. "I lost myself when I lost you." The words hit her like a physical blow. "You didn't lose me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You left me." Before Julian could respond, there was another knock. Marie opened the door without waiting. "Judge Warren, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Chief Judge is asking to speak with you. He says it's about the Cross case." The reality of their situation came rushing back. This wasn't a reunion between old lovers. This was a massive ethical breach that could damage her career and the integrity of the court. "You need to go," Celeste told Julian. "Whatever we were to each other, it's in the past. Now you're a defendant in my courtroom, and I'm the judge who will likely have to recuse herself because of it." Julian nodded slowly, turning to leave. At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth, I never stopped thinking about you, and I never stopped regretting walking away." When he was gone, Celeste sank back into her chair, her hands trembling. Tomorrow she would do the right thing. She would recuse herself and explain to the Chief Judge that she had a past relationship with the defendant. But tonight, alone in her chambers, she allowed herself to feel the weight of seeing Julian again, the anger, the hurt, and the tiny, traitorous spark that had ignited when their eyes met across the courtroom, a spark she had thought was extinguished years ago. Marie appeared in the doorway. "The Chief Judge is waiting, Your Honor." Celeste stood, straightening her robe. "Tell him I'm on my way." As she walked down the hallway toward the Chief Judge's office, one question burned in her mind. Why had Julian insisted that she be the one to judge him? And more importantly, could she trust herself to be fair if she did? Chief Judge Maurice Richardson was not a man who appreciated surprises. His office, like his courtroom, was meticulously organized. Every pen lined up, every paper in its proper folder. "Judge Warren," he said as Celeste entered, "please sit down." At 65, Richardson had been on the bench for over 30 years. His silver hair and perpetual frown had intimidated generations of lawyers, but Celeste had always stood her ground with him, earning his grudging respect. "I understand there may be a conflict of interest in the Cross case," he said, getting straight to the point. Celeste nodded. "Yes, sir. I knew the defendant personally several years ago." "How personally?" Richardson's eyes narrowed. "We were in a relationship during law school," Celeste replied, keeping her voice steady. "It ended before I graduated." Richardson sighed. "This is a high-profile case, Warren. The press is already circling. If you recuse yourself now, they'll dig until they find out why." "I understand, sir, but judicial ethics are clear on this matter." "Ethics, yes," Richardson agreed, "but there's also the practical consideration. The Cross case has been delayed twice already. The prosecution is pushing for a speedy trial." He leaned forward. "Did you two end on bad terms?" The question caught Celeste off guard. "He left without saying goodbye," she said, more sharply than she intended. "But that was 7 years ago. Do you believe you can be impartial?" Celeste considered the question carefully. Could she separate her personal history from her professional duty? Could she look at Julian Cross, the man who broke her heart, and see only Julian Cross, the defendant? "I believe I can, sir," she said finally, "but I'm concerned about the appearance of impropriety." Richardson nodded. "A valid concern, but consider this. Judge Winters is out for medical leave. Judge Patel is overwhelmed with the Riverside corruption case, and the other judges in our district are booked solid. If you recuse yourself, this case gets delayed again by at least 2 months." He folded his hands on the desk. "The defendant himself stated in open court that he has no objection to you presiding. Unless you feel you cannot be fair, I'd prefer you stay on the case." Celeste was surprised. She'd expected Richardson to insist she step down. "Sleep on it," Richardson said, standing to signal the end of the meeting. "Let me know your decision in the morning." That night in her apartment, Celeste paced the floor. Professionally, she knew recusing herself was the safest choice, but Richardson's practicality made sense, and something about Julian's insistence that she be the one to judge him nagged at her. Why? What was his angle? The Julian she had known was brilliant, but straightforward. The Julian who appeared in her courtroom today, wealthy, polished, charged with fraud, was a stranger wearing a familiar face. By morning, she had made her decision. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Celeste Warren," Bill announced as Celeste entered the courtroom the next day. The room was even more crowded than before, word having spread about some connection between the judge and the defendant. Celeste took her seat, her face betraying nothing of her inner turmoil. "After careful consideration," she began, "I have decided to continue presiding over this case. Neither the prosecution nor the defense has formally requested my recusal, and I believe I can adjudicate this matter fairly and impartially." She looked directly at Julian for the first time that day. "However, I want to state for the record that Mr. Cross and I were acquainted during our time at Chicago Law School 7 years ago. If either counsel wishes to file a motion based on this information, you may do so now." Sandra Mills, the prosecutor, looked surprised but shook her head. "The state has no objection, Your Honor." Julian's attorney, Davidson, glanced at his client, who gave a small nod. "The defense has no objection either, Your Honor." "Then we will proceed with opening statements," Celeste said, tapping her gavel. Mills approached the jury, a confident woman in her 40s with short red hair and a no-nonsense manner. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this case is about trust, deception, and greed. Julian Cross presents himself as a self-made millionaire, a financial genius who built his fortune through hard work and brilliant investing." She paused for effect. "But the evidence will show that Mr. Cross's success came at the expense of others, that he used inside information, illegally obtained, to make stock trades that earned him millions while causing ordinary investors to lose their life savings." Mills paced in front of the jury box. "You'll hear testimony from employees at Meridian Capital, where Mr. Cross worked, who will tell you how he pressured them for confidential information. You'll see financial records showing suspicious patterns of trading just before major company announcements. And you'll hear from victims, hard-working people who trusted the system, only to have their retirements wiped out by Mr. Cross's greed." She returned to her table. "By the end of this trial, you will have no choice but to find the defendant guilty on all counts." Celeste nodded. "Mr. Davidson, your opening statement." Julian's attorney stood. He was tall and thin, with silver temples that gave him an air of distinction. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began smoothly, "my client, Julian Cross, is indeed a self-made man. The son of a factory worker and a nurse, he put himself through college and part of law school before discovering his talent for financial markets." Davidson smiled at the jury. "The prosecution wants you to believe that such success must be the result of cheating. They cannot imagine that a young man from Julian's background could achieve so much legitimately." He walked toward the jury. "But the evidence will show that Julian Cross built his fortune through intelligence, hard work, and I repeat, legal investment strategies. Yes, he made bold moves. Yes, he took risks, but at no time did he break the law." Davidson returned to stand beside Julian. "The prosecution's case is built on coincidence, jealousy from former colleagues, and a fundamental misunderstanding of how financial markets work. When you hear all the evidence, you will find my client not guilty of all charges." As Davidson sat down, Celeste noticed Julian watching her, his expression unreadable. She quickly shifted her focus. "The prosecution may call its first witness," she said. Mills stood. "The state calls Howard Feldman." A nervous-looking man in his 50s took the stand. After being sworn in, he adjusted his glasses and looked around the courtroom. "Mr. Feldman, what is your position?" Mills asked. "I'm the compliance officer at Meridian Capital," he replied. "I oversee all trading activity to ensure it follows regulatory guidelines." "And how do you know the defendant?" Feldman glanced at Julian. "He joined our firm about 6 years ago, started as an analyst but rose quickly to become one of our top portfolio managers." "Was there anything unusual about Mr. Cross's trading patterns?" Mills asked. "Objection," Davidson called out. "Calls for speculation." "I'll rephrase," Mills said before Celeste could rule. "Mr. Feldman, as compliance officer, did you ever flag any of Mr. Cross's trades for review?" Feldman nodded. "Yes, 3 times in the past 2 years." "And why was that?" "In each case, Mr. Cross made significant investments just days before major company announcements that affected stock prices. The timing was..." concerning. Mills walked to her table and picked up a document. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit A, Mr. Feldman's compliance reports. As the document was being distributed, Celeste caught Julian shaking his head slightly, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. It was an expression she remembered well from their law school days, the look he got when he felt misunderstood. For hours, Mills led Feldman through detailed testimony about Julian's trading patterns, the compliance investigations, and the suspiciously timed investments that had made Julian millions. When it was Davidson's turn to cross-examine, his approach was aggressive. Mr. Feldman, in your 6 years working with Mr. Cross, did you ever find concrete evidence that he had inside information? Not suspicions, not concerns, actual evidence? Feldman hesitated. No, but yes or no will suffice, Davidson interrupted. No concrete evidence, correct? Correct, Feldman admitted. And isn't it true that all of Mr. Cross's trades were ultimately approved by your office? Yes, but that doesn't mean— Thank you, Mr. Feldman. Davidson cut him off again. No further questions. As the first day of testimony continued, Celeste watched Julian carefully. Unlike many defendants who fidgeted or avoided eye contact, he sat calmly, taking notes and occasionally whispering to his attorney. But whenever there was a break in proceedings, she caught him looking at her with an intensity that was unsettling. By late afternoon, when Celeste called a recess until the following day, she was exhausted from the effort of maintaining her judicial mask. The strain of seeing Julian hour after hour, of hearing about his life after he'd left her, was taking a toll. In her chambers, Celeste removed her robe and slumped into her chair. A knock at the door made her straighten up immediately. "Come in," she called, expecting Marie. Instead, Sandra Mills entered, looking troubled. "Judge Warren, do you have a moment?" "Of course," Celeste replied, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What can I do for you, Ms. Mills?" Mills sat down, clearly uncomfortable. "I apologize for the intrusion, but something has been bothering me since this morning. You mentioned knowing the defendant from law school." "That's correct. What you didn't specify," Mills continued carefully, "was the nature of that acquaintance." Celeste felt her guard rise. "I'm not sure that's relevant to the case, Ms. Mills. With all due respect, Your Honor, if there was a romantic relationship between you and the defendant, it could affect how this case is perceived, regardless of your ability to be impartial." The directness of the statement caught Celeste off guard. "Ms. Mills, I disclosed what I felt was necessary. Chief Judge Richardson is aware of the full situation and supported my decision to remain on the case." Mills nodded slowly. "I understand, Your Honor, and I'm not questioning your integrity, but the media is already speculating. A reporter approached me after court today, asking about rumors of a past relationship between you and Mr. Cross." Celeste's stomach tightened. This was exactly what she had feared. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing," Mills assured her. "But they're digging. If they find something concrete, it could undermine public confidence in the proceedings." "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Celeste said, her voice cooler than she intended. "I'll take it under advisement." After Mills left, Celeste sat in silence, weighing her options. If she stepped down now, mid-trial, it would create exactly the kind of media circus she had hoped to avoid. But continuing meant walking a tightrope of professional ethics that grew narrower by the day. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. "We need to talk. Privately. It's important. J. Julian." How had he gotten her personal number? And what could possibly be so important that he would risk contacting her directly during his own trial? Against her better judgment, she replied, "This is completely inappropriate." His response came seconds later. "I know, but it's not about us, it's about the case. Something isn't right. Please, Celeste." The use of her first name, the plea in his message, it all felt too familiar, too intimate. She put the phone down without responding. That evening, as Celeste was leaving the courthouse, a heavy rain had started to fall. She stood under the portico, watching the downpour and waiting for a break to dash to her car. "Need an umbrella?" The voice behind her made her heart jump. Julian stood there, holding a large black umbrella, his suit jacket slightly damp from the rain. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "You know we can't talk outside of court." "I'll keep it professional," he promised, his tone serious. "But there's something you need to know about this case. Something that didn't come out in court today." Celeste glanced around. The courthouse steps were deserted in the rain, but someone could appear at any moment. "5 minutes," she said finally, "in my car, and then you never approach me like this again." Julian nodded, following her into the parking garage. Once inside her car, With the rain drumming on the roof, Celeste turned to him, keeping her expression stern. "What's so important that you're risking a mistrial?" Julian ran a hand through his damp hair, a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache with unwanted memories. "I didn't do what they're accusing me of," he said quietly, "but I think someone set me up to take the fall." Celeste shook her head. "That's what every defendant says. If you have evidence, your lawyer should present it in court." "Davidson doesn't believe me," Julian replied, frustration evident in his voice. "He thinks our best strategy is to attack the prosecution's case, not present an alternative theory." "That's his job," Celeste pointed out, "and this conversation is highly inappropriate. I could report it to the chief judge." "But you won't," Julian said, his eyes meeting hers. It wasn't a question. The certainty in his voice irritated her. "You don't know me anymore, Julian. 7 years is a long time. Not long enough to forget how you look when you're trying to hide what you're thinking," he said softly. "Your eyes always give you away." Celeste looked away, unnerved by how easily he still read her. "Your 5 minutes are up." "One more thing," Julian said urgently. "Check the trading records from Meridian Capital for June 15th last year. There's a pattern there that doesn't make sense. If there's exculpatory evidence, have your lawyer subpoena it," Celeste replied, starting the car in a clear dismissal. Julian opened the door to leave, but paused. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he said, "but I'm not the man they're making me out to be in court. I made mistakes. Leaving you was the biggest one, but I'm not a criminal." The sincerity in his voice stirred something in Celeste she had thought long buried, but she couldn't afford to listen to it. "Goodbye, Julian," she said firmly. "I'll see you in court tomorrow." As she drove home through the rain, Celeste couldn't shake his words from her mind. What if Julian was telling the truth? What if someone had set him up? But that wasn't her job to determine. She was the judge, not an investigator. Her role was to ensure a fair trial, not to uncover the truth herself. Yet that night, as she lay in bed unable to sleep, Celeste found herself thinking about the trading records Julian had mentioned. June 15th. What was significant about that date? Reaching for her phone, she did a quick search for news from that day last year. Several headlines immediately caught her attention. Breaking: tech giant Quantum announces surprise merger. Market stunned by Quantum next-gen deal. Stocks soar on unexpected merger news. The Quantum next-gen merger had been one of the biggest business stories of the year, and according to the prosecution, Julian had made a fortune trading Quantum stock just before the announcement. But if Julian was claiming he'd been set up, what had he meant about a pattern that didn't make sense? Celeste put down her phone, troubled. She couldn't start investigating on her own based on a defendant's claims. That would be crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Still, as she finally drifted off to sleep, Julian's face appeared in her mind. Not the polished businessman from the courtroom, but the earnest law student she had once loved, with his passionate belief in justice and truth. The man who had promised her forever, then walked away without a word. The trial would continue tomorrow, and Celeste would do her job with the impartiality her position demanded. But for the first time, she found herself wondering if there was more to this case, and to Julian Cross, than met the eye. Morning arrived with dark clouds hanging over Chicago. Celeste had barely slept, Julian's words echoing in her mind. As she prepared for court, she reminded herself firmly that her job was to be impartial, not to investigate claims made by a defendant during an improper private meeting. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. In the courthouse parking garage, Marie was waiting for her, looking worried. "Judge Warren, you need to see this," she said, handing Celeste a copy of the Chicago Tribune. There, on the front page of the business section, was a headline that made Celeste's blood run cold. "Judge and defendant, a past romance?" The article didn't have many details, just speculation about why Judge Celeste Warren had initially considered recusing herself from the Cross case, and anonymous sources suggesting a past relationship. But it was enough to create exactly the kind of media attention Celeste had feared. "Chief Judge Richardson called," Marie added. "He wants to see you before court begins." Richardson was pacing in his office when Celeste arrived, the newspaper clutched in his hand. "I assume you've seen this," he said, tossing it onto his desk. "Yes, sir," Celeste replied. "I don't know where they got their information, but—" "It doesn't matter where they got it," Richardson interrupted. "What matters is how we respond. The defense could use this to request a mistrial." "Julian, Mr. Cross has shown no interest in doing that," Celeste pointed out. "He specifically stated in open court that he wanted me to continue presiding." Richardson frowned, which raises another question. Why? Why would a defendant want a judge with whom he has a personal history? It was the same question that had been nagging at Celeste. I don't know, she admitted, but I believe I can still be fair. It's not about whether you can be fair, Warren. It's about the appearance of fairness. Richardson sighed heavily. But we're already in the middle of the trial. Replacing you now would mean starting over, and the court calendar is backed up for months. He looked at her directly. Can you weather this storm? The press will be relentless. They'll dig into your past, your relationship. Every ruling you make will be scrutinized for bias. Celeste straightened her shoulders. I can handle it. Very well, Richardson said. But from now on, document everything. Every interaction, every ruling, every conversation with either attorney, and for God's sake, avoid any private contact with the defendant. Celeste nodded, thinking of their meeting in the parking garage with a pang of guilt. Of course, sir. When she entered the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The gallery was packed, with reporters filling every available seat. Julian sat at the defense table, his face a carefully composed mask, but his eyes found hers immediately. All rise, Bill announced, and the proceedings began. Ms. Mills, you may call your next witness, Celeste said, determined to show no sign of the turmoil she felt. The state calls Tyler Raines, Mills announced. A young man in his 20s took the stand. With his slicked-back hair and expensive watch, he looked like he was trying too hard to project success. After Raines was sworn in, Mills began her questioning. Mr. Raines, what is your position at Meridian Capital? I'm a junior analyst, he replied. I report directly to senior portfolio managers, including Mr. Cross. And what are your duties? I research companies for potential investment, analyze market trends, prepare reports for the managers. Mills nodded. Did there come a time when Mr. Cross asked you to do something beyond these normal duties? Raines shifted uncomfortably. Yes. About a year ago, he asked me to get information about quantum technologies, not just the public information, but internal documents, forecasts, that sort of thing. And did you have access to such information? Not directly, Raines admitted, but my roommate works in Quantum's finance department. Julian, Mr. Cross knew this from a company party. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Celeste tapped her gavel once for silence. Did Mr. Cross specifically ask you to get information from your roommate? Mills pressed. Well, not in those exact words, Raines hedged. He said something like, it would be really helpful if we knew what Quantum was planning. Don't you have a friend there who might talk? Mills walked to her table and picked up a document. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit C, emails between Mr. Raines and the defendant. As the emails were distributed, Celeste noticed Julian whispering urgently to his attorney, who was shaking his head. Mr. Raines, Mills continued, in these emails, dated June 10th of last year, Mr. Cross writes, and I quote, need that quantum info ASAP, whatever you can get. How did you interpret this request? Raines swallowed nervously. I understood he wanted me to get inside information, and I tried, but my roommate wouldn't tell me anything specific. He knew it would be illegal. What did you tell Mr. Cross? I made something up, Raines admitted, looking down. I told him my source said Quantum was planning a major acquisition. I thought it would make me look good, like I had valuable connections. And what did Mr. Cross do with this information? He started buying Quantum stock, a lot of it. And 5 days later, what happened? Raines looked miserable. Quantum announced they were merging with NextGen. Their stock price doubled overnight. And Mr. Cross made millions, Mills concluded. Objection, Davidson called out. Speculation. Sustained, Celeste ruled. The jury will disregard the prosecutor's last statement. Mills nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. Davidson stood for cross-examination, his expression confident. Mr. Raines, let's be clear about what actually happened here. You admit that you lied to Mr. Cross about having inside information, correct? Yes, but a simple yes is sufficient, Davidson cut him off. So Mr. Cross made his investment decisions based on false information that you provided, Raines squirmed. Technically, yes. Not technically. Actually, Davidson's tone was scathing. You lied to impress your boss, and by sheer coincidence your lie turned out to somewhat resemble reality. Is that accurate? I guess so, yes. Furthermore, you testified that Mr. Cross never explicitly asked you to obtain illegal inside information. He simply asked if your friend might talk about Quantum. Is that correct? Yes, but it was implied according to your interpretation, Davidson interrupted, but not stated explicitly. Correct? Correct, Raines mumbled. No further questions, Davidson said, returning to his seat. As the day progressed, Mills called more witnesses, an SEC investigator who detailed suspicious patterns in Julian's trading history, and a financial analyst who explained how Julian's investments had consistently beaten market expectations in ways that seemed statistically improbable without inside information. Throughout it all, Celeste maintained her judicial composure, giving no hint of her inner turmoil. But she couldn't help noticing small details about Julian that only someone who had once known him intimately would recognize. The way he tapped his pen when frustrated, how he tilted his head slightly when listening intently, the subtle tightening around his eyes when something bothered him. And something was definitely bothering him during Raines's testimony. Julian had seemed genuinely surprised, even angry, at what the young analyst had said. At the end of the day, Celeste called a recess until morning. As she gathered her papers, she noticed a small note had been slipped among them. Check Raines's account, June 15th 20, J. She quickly crumpled the note, looking around to see if anyone had noticed. How had Julian managed to pass her a note in her own courtroom, and why was he so intent on drawing her attention to these specific dates? Against her better judgment, Celeste found herself thinking about it as she drove home. June 15th was when the Quantum NextGen merger was announced. Julian had made his suspicious trades in the days before, but what about Raines? What would his account show? At home, Celeste tried to distract herself with work, reviewing cases scheduled for next week, but her mind kept returning to Julian's note. Finally, she set aside her files and opened her laptop. As a judge, she had access to sealed court documents, including evidence submitted but not yet presented in trial. It would be highly unusual for her to review such documents outside of court, but not technically improper if it related to the case before her. She found the file containing financial records for all Meridian employees involved in the case. Scrolling through, she located Tyler Raines's trading history. What she saw made her sit up straight. On June 15th, the day of the merger announcement, Raines had made a substantial trade, buying a large block of NextGen stock, not Quantum. And he'd sold it 2 days later for nearly triple his investment. NextGen, not Quantum. The company being acquired, not the one doing the acquiring. If Julian had been getting inside information from Raines, why would he focus only on Quantum, while Raines invested in NextGen? Something wasn't adding up. Celeste closed the file, troubled by what she'd found, but unsure what it meant. She was venturing into dangerous territory, looking for information based on a defendant's cryptic note. This wasn't her role, but she couldn't deny that doubt had crept in. What if Julian was telling the truth about being set up? The next morning, as Celeste prepared for court, her phone rang. It was Richardson. "Warren, have you seen the news?" "Not yet," she replied, a sense of dread building. "Channel 5 is running a story. They've got pictures of you and Cross from law school. Someone's talking. Classmates, maybe. They know you two were engaged." Celeste's hand tightened on the phone. "We were never engaged, just dating." "Well, they're claiming otherwise, and that's not all. They're reporting that you met with Cross privately during the trial." Her heart sank. Someone had seen them in the parking garage. "Sir, I can explain—" "Save it," Richardson cut her off. "Get to my office, now." 30 minutes later, Celeste sat across from Richardson, her career hanging in the balance. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen," he said, his face grim. "The integrity of the court is being questioned. I have no choice but to remove you from the case." "Sir, please," Celeste argued. "There are only a few days of testimony left. Switching judges now will cause even more disruption." "I don't see an alternative," Richardson replied. Unless what? Unless you can convince both counsel to agree to continue with you as judge, on the record, with full knowledge of these new allegations." It was a slim chance, but Celeste seized it. "Let me talk to them." In a private conference room, Celeste faced Mills and Davidson. "I won't deny that Mr. Cross and I had a relationship during law school," she said frankly, "but it ended 7 years ago, and I am confident in my ability to remain impartial." Mills looked skeptical. "And the report that you met privately with the defendant during trial?" Celeste took a deep breath. "Mr. Cross approached me in the parking garage after court. He wanted to discuss the case. I told him such contact was inappropriate and ended the conversation immediately. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a complete lie either. If either of you feels I cannot be fair, I will recuse myself," she concluded. "But I believe the interests of justice are best served by completing this trial without further delay." Mills considered for a moment. "The state has no objection to your continuing, Your Honor. We trust in your professionalism." Davidson glanced at Celeste with shrewd eyes. And the defense has no objection either. In fact, my client specifically requests that you remain on the case. Back in Richardson's office, Celeste reported their agreement. Very well, he said reluctantly, but this is your last chance, Warren. One more hint of impropriety and I'll remove you regardless of what counsel wants. When court resumed, Celeste addressed the situation head-on. Before we continue with testimony, I wish to address recent media reports, she said. It is true that Mr. Cross and I were acquainted during law school. This fact was disclosed to counsel and to Chief Judge Richardson before the trial began. Both the prosecution and defense have affirmed their confidence in my ability to preside fairly over these proceedings. She looked out at the crowded courtroom. This court is committed to justice, not sensationalism. We will continue with the state's case. Mills stood. The prosecution calls Benjamin Foster. A distinguished-looking man in his 50s took the stand. After being sworn in, he identified himself as the CFO of Quantum Technologies. Mr. Foster, Mills began, were you involved in the merger negotiations with NextGen last year? Yes, I was part of the core team that worked on the deal. How secret were these negotiations? Foster leaned forward. Extremely. Only 5 people at Quantum knew about it until a week before the announcement. Not even our board was fully informed until the final stages. So the information about this merger would have been valuable to investors. Absolutely. Anyone who knew in advance could have made millions. Mills nodded. No further questions. As Davidson began his cross-examination, Celeste noticed Julian watching Foster intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. Mr. Foster, Davidson said smoothly, during the period of these secret negotiations, did you ever meet Julian Cross? Not that I recall, no. Did you ever communicate with him by phone, email, or any other means? No, I did not. So you have no direct knowledge that Mr. Cross had access to inside information about the merger? Foster frowned. No direct knowledge, no, but someone clearly did. The trading patterns— Thank you, that's all, Davidson interrupted. No further questions. Mills stood again. The state calls its final witness Vanessa Chen. A stylish woman in her 30s took the stand. With her confident manner and sharp gaze, she immediately commanded attention. Ms. Chen, what is your relationship to the defendant? Mills asked. I was Julian's girlfriend for about a year, Chen replied coolly. We broke up 8 months ago. Celeste felt an unexpected pang at this confirmation of Julian's romantic life after her. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the testimony. During your relationship, did Mr. Cross ever discuss his investment strategies with you? Chen nodded. All the time. Julian was obsessed with his work. He was always talking about his system for beating the market. Did he ever mention using non-public information? Not in those words, Chen said, but he would brag about having sources and connections that gave him an edge. Can you give us a specific example? Mills pressed. Chen thought for a moment. Once we were at dinner and he got a text. After reading it, he excused himself to make a trade right there in the restaurant. The next day he told me he'd made over $100,000 on that one trade because he had friends in the right places. Celeste watched Julian's reaction. His face had darkened, his jaw clenched tight. Was it anger at being exposed, or at what he perceived as a betrayal? No further questions, Mills said, returning to her seat. Davidson approached Chen with a predatory smile. Ms. Chen, is it fair to say your breakup with Mr. Cross was not amicable? Chen's eyes narrowed. He ended it suddenly, with no explanation. So no, it wasn't amicable. And since then, you've made certain statements about him on social media, haven't you? Calling him, and I quote, a lying, manipulative snake and suggesting you would make him pay someday? Chen flushed. I was upset. Upset enough to fabricate testimony? Objection, Mills called out. Counsel is attacking the witness's character. Sustained, Celeste ruled. Mr. Davidson, confine your questions to relevant matters. Davidson nodded. Ms. Chen, did you ever actually see any text messages containing inside information? No, but did Mr. Cross ever explicitly tell you he was trading on inside information? Not in those exact words, no. Thank you, Davidson said. No further questions. The state rests, Your Honor, Mills announced. Celeste nodded. We'll hear the defense's case beginning tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned. As people filed out of the courtroom, Celeste noticed Julian in an intense discussion with Davidson. The attorney was shaking his head emphatically, while Julian looked increasingly frustrated. In her chambers, Celeste removed her robe and sat heavily in her chair. The trial was taking an emotional toll she hadn't anticipated. Seeing Julian day after day, hearing about his life after he'd left her, the girlfriends, the millions, the apparent corruption of the idealistic young man she'd once loved, it was all wearing her down. And yet, those nagging doubts remained. The discrepancy in Raines's trading pattern, Julian's insistence that he'd been set up, the way he looked at her, not like a guilty man hoping for leniency, but like someone desperate to be believed. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Davidson entered, looking troubled. "Judge Warren, I apologize for the intrusion, but I need to inform you of a development." "What is it, Mr. Davidson?" "My client wishes to take the stand in his own defense," Davidson said, clearly unhappy about it. "Against my strong advice." This was unexpected. Defendants in financial crime cases rarely testified, as it opened them up to damaging cross-examination. "That's his right," Celeste replied carefully. "But I'm not sure why you're telling me this in private." Davidson sighed. "Because he's insisting on it and I'm concerned about his motivations. Given your past relationship, I wanted to ensure you were prepared. His testimony may include personal elements." Celeste felt a flutter of alarm. "Mr. Davidson, if your client intends to turn this trial into a platform for personal matters, I will not allow it." "I've advised him of that," Davidson assured her. "But he's determined to tell his side of the story, all of it." After Davidson left, Celeste sat in silence, trying to imagine what Julian might say on the stand. Would he reveal details of their relationship, try to appeal to her emotions, use their shared past to sway her ruling? Or was there something else, something he couldn't say except under oath? That evening, Celeste decided to walk home, needing the fresh air to clear her head. As she turned onto her street, she noticed a car parked across from her building, a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver's door opened and Vanessa Chen stepped out. "Judge Warren," she called, "can I talk to you?" Every instinct told Celeste to refuse. Speaking privately with a witness was completely improper, but something in Chen's expression, a mixture of determination and fear, made her pause. "Ms. Chen, if this is about the case, we cannot have this conversation," Celeste said firmly. "It's about Julian," Chen replied, "and it's not what you think. He didn't do what they're saying he did." Celeste stared at her in shock. "You just testified against him." "I had to," Chen said, her voice low and urgent. "They have something on me. Tax problems from years ago. They said they'd look the other way if I helped build their case against Julian." "Who is they?" Celeste asked, her professional caution warring with burning curiosity. Chen glanced around nervously. "I don't know exactly, but it's bigger than just the prosecutor's office. Someone wants Julian to take the fall and they're pulling strings to make it happen." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the only one who can help him," Chen said. "Julian told me about you, you know. Not much, but enough to know you were important to him, that he regretted how things ended." The mention of Julian talking about her to his girlfriend was surreal, but Celeste pushed past it. "Ms. Chen, if you have evidence of misconduct, there are proper channels—" "No," Chen interrupted. "They'll bury it. Or me." She reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. "This contains trading records that didn't make it into evidence. Records that show Julian wasn't the only one making suspicious trades before the quantum merger. But unlike Julian, these people had direct access to the merger information." She pressed the drive into Celeste's hand. "Look at it or don't. But Julian's not guilty. Not of this." Before Celeste could respond, Chen hurried back to her car and drove away. Celeste stood on the sidewalk, the flash drive heavy in her palm. Using evidence not properly submitted in court would be a serious breach of judicial ethics, but ignoring potential proof of a defendant's innocence, especially if there was prosecutorial misconduct, would be a perversion of justice. In her apartment, Celeste placed the flash drive on her kitchen table and stared at it. Opening it would cross a line, but leaving it unopened might mean sending an innocent man to prison. A man she had once loved, a man who, despite everything, still made her heart beat faster when their eyes met across the courtroom. With a deep breath, she made her decision. Morning light filtered through Celeste's bedroom curtains as she sat on the edge of her bed, exhausted from a night of little sleep. The flash drive Vanessa Chen had given her lay on her nightstand, its contents now known to her. What she had discovered left her shaken. The trading records showed a clear pattern. In the days before the Quantum Next Gen merger announcement, several Meridian Capital employees had made suspicious trades. But while Julian's investments were all in Quantum, the company doing the acquiring, the others, including Tyler Raines and his direct supervisor, Martin Kelly, had invested heavily in NextGen, the company being acquired. More importantly, Kelly had been in regular contact with Benjamin Foster, Quantum's CFO, in the weeks leading up to the merger. Phone records, emails, even dinner reservations, all documented on the flash drive. If these records were authentic, they painted a disturbing picture. Martin Kelly had the inside information, used it himself, and possibly fed false information to Julian through Rains to create a convenient scapegoat. But Celeste couldn't use this information. It hadn't been properly submitted as evidence. It came from a witness who had already testified, one who now claimed she'd been coerced. Using it would violate every principle of judicial conduct she'd sworn to uphold. As she dressed for court, Celeste faced the most difficult decision of her career. If Julian was innocent, the truth needed to come out. But it wasn't her job to uncover that truth. It was the job of the attorneys, the jury, the system, a system she had devoted her life to serving. In the courthouse, an unusual tension filled the air. Word had spread that Julian Cross would be taking the stand in his own defense, and the gallery was packed beyond capacity. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Celeste Warren," Bill announced as Celeste entered, her face betraying none of the turmoil within her. "You may be seated," she said. "Mr. Davidson, call your first witness." Davidson stood, looking resigned. "The defense calls Julian Cross." Julian approached the witness stand with the same confidence he'd shown throughout the trial. After being sworn in, he sat straight-backed, his eyes finding Celeste's briefly before focusing on his attorney. "Mr. Cross," Davidson began, "did you use inside information to make trades related to the Quantum NextGen merger last year?" "No, I did not," Julian replied firmly. "Can you explain your investment in Quantum prior to the merger announcement?" Julian nodded. "I had been tracking Quantum for months. Their stock was undervalued based on their intellectual property holdings alone. When Tyler Rains came to me, claiming he had information about a potential acquisition, I took it with a grain of salt. Rains was always trying to impress me. So why did you invest so heavily in Quantum at that time?" "Because my own analysis supported it, regardless of what Rains said. I believed Quantum was positioned for significant growth, with or without an acquisition." Davidson walked closer to the stand. "Mr. Cross, several witnesses have testified that you boasted about having sources and connections that gave you an edge in the market. How do you respond to that?" Julian's expression hardened. "My sources were public financial statements, SEC filings, patent applications, and industry trends, all perfectly legal. When I talked about connections, I meant relationships with industry experts and analysts, not insiders feeding me secret information." "And Miss Chen's testimony. She claimed you made trades based on text messages containing inside tips." "Vanessa misinterpreted what happened," Julian said. "The text she referred to was from my automated alert system, notifying me of unusual trading volume in a stock I was watching. It wasn't inside information. It was a data point available to any investor paying attention." For an hour, Davidson led Julian through his defense, allowing him to explain his investment strategy, deny the allegations against him, and present himself as a legitimate, if aggressive, investor who had been targeted by jealous colleagues and overzealous prosecutors. But Celeste noticed that Julian seemed distracted, as if waiting for something. His eyes kept drifting toward her, then away, a question in them she couldn't answer. Finally, Davidson concluded, "No further questions, Your Honor." "Cross-examination, Miss Mills," Celeste asked. Mills approached the stand, her manner confident. "Mr. Cross, you claim you made your investment decisions based on legitimate analysis. Yet, by remarkable coincidence, you invested heavily in Quantum just days before a merger no one saw coming. Do you expect the jury to believe that was just lucky timing?" "It wasn't luck," Julian replied. "It was research. The signs were there if you knew what to look for. Signs that somehow the entire financial community missed except for you." Julian shook his head. "Not just me. If you looked at the trading patterns of certain Meridian employees, particularly Martin Kelly, you'd see similar lucky timing. Except Kelly invested in NextGen, not Quantum." Mills frowned. "Mr. Kelly isn't on trial here. Maybe he should be," Julian said quietly. "Objection!" Mills called out. "The defendant is making unsupported accusations against individuals not present." "Sustained," Celeste ruled. "The jury will disregard the defendant's last statement." Mills continued her cross-examination, pushing Julian on inconsistencies in his story, challenging his explanations, and repeatedly suggesting that his success was too extraordinary to be legitimate. Throughout it all, Julian remained composed, answering each question directly. But as the questioning continued, he seemed to be growing increasingly frustrated, as if waiting for an opportunity that wasn't coming. "One final question, Mr. Cross," Mills said. "If you're as innocent as you claim, why did multiple witnesses testify that you bragged about having inside information?" Julian's jaw tightened. "Because I made enemies on my way up, because success breeds resentment, and because—" He paused, then continued with quiet intensity, "because sometimes people are set up to take a fall." "No further questions," Mills said, returning to her seat. "Redirect, Mr. Davidson," Celeste asked. Davidson stood. "Just one question. Mr. Cross, is there anything else you'd like to tell the jury about your investment decisions?" Julian looked directly at Celeste, then out at the packed courtroom. "Yes. The truth is that I've made mistakes in my life. Serious ones. I've hurt people I cared about. I've been selfish and ambitious at the expense of relationships that mattered." Davidson looked alarmed by this unexpected turn, but Julian continued. "But I never broke the law. I never cheated or stole or used inside information. I worked hard, studied the markets obsessively, took calculated risks, and yes, sometimes I got lucky. That's not a crime." His eyes returned to Celeste. "I've spent years trying to prove something. To myself, to the world, maybe to people I left behind. I thought success and money would make me happy, would make me whole. I was wrong." Davidson tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, I'd like to—" "Let him finish," Celeste said, surprising herself and everyone in the courtroom. Julian nodded gratefully. "Whatever happens in this case, I want the truth to come out, not just about the trades, but about who I am. I'm not the man the prosecution has portrayed, but I'm also not the man I was 7 years ago, when I made the biggest mistake of my life by walking away from the one person who saw me clearly, who believed in me." The courtroom was utterly silent. Everyone present could feel that something extraordinary was happening, something beyond the normal boundaries of testimony. "No further questions," Davidson said quietly, returning to his seat. "The witness may step down," Celeste said, her voice remarkably steady despite the storm of emotions within her. Julian returned to the defense table, his testimony over, his eyes never leaving Celeste's face. "Does the defense have any further witnesses?" Celeste asked. "No, Your Honor," Davidson replied. "The defense rests." "Very well," Celeste said. "We'll hear closing arguments after lunch. Court is in recess." In her chambers, Celeste paced back and forth, Julian's words echoing in her mind. He hadn't been speaking to the jury, he'd been speaking to her, about them, about what had been lost, but that wasn't what troubled her most. It was the flash drive, the evidence that suggested Julian might be telling the truth about being set up. Evidence she couldn't use, couldn't even acknowledge having seen, unless— A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Marie. Instead, Chief Judge Richardson entered, his expression grave. "Warren, we need to talk. The media circus around this case has gone beyond anything I've seen in 30 years on the bench. Your past relationship with the defendant is now being discussed on national news." Celeste nodded. "I'm aware, sir." "There's more," Richardson continued. "I've received information suggesting prosecutorial misconduct in this case. Anonymous, but detailed." Celeste's heart raced. Had Vanessa Chen gone to Richardson too? "What kind of misconduct?" she asked carefully. "Allegations that witnesses were pressured, evidence withheld, specifically trading records showing suspicious activity by other Meridian employees." It was the same information Celeste had seen on the flash drive. "I've ordered the prosecutor to turn over all records related to Martin Kelly and other Meridian employees by this afternoon," Richardson said. "If there's been misconduct, I want it exposed before this case goes to the jury." Celeste felt a wave of relief. The truth would come out through proper channels, without her having to compromise her judicial ethics. "Thank you for telling me, sir," she said. Richardson fixed her with a stern look. "I'm telling you because I need you to be prepared. If these allegations are substantiated, the prosecution's case may fall apart, and given your history with the defendant, every ruling you make will be scrutinized like never before." "I understand, sir. I'll proceed with appropriate caution." When court resumed for closing arguments, there was a noticeable tension between Mills and her assistant prosecutors. Papers were being shuffled urgently, whispered consultations occurring behind cupped hands. "Ms. Mills, are you ready to proceed?" Celeste asked. Mills stood looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Your Honor, the state requests a brief continuance to review some newly available evidence. What evidence would that be, Ms. Mills? Trading records for Meridian Capital employees that were not previously included in our case file, Your Honor. A murmur ran through the courtroom. At the defense table, Julian leaned forward, suddenly alert. These records were in the prosecution's possession all along, Celeste asked, her tone carefully neutral. Mills hesitated. They were available to us, Your Honor, but not considered relevant to the specific charges against Mr. Cross. I see, Celeste said. And now you believe they may be relevant. We're reassessing that determination, Your Honor. Celeste considered the request. Normally, she would grant a brief continuance for the prosecution to review new evidence. But this wasn't new evidence. It was evidence they had withheld, either deliberately or negligently. Request denied, she said firmly. The prosecution has had ample time to prepare its case. We will proceed with closing arguments as scheduled. Mills looked shaken but composed herself quickly. Yes, Your Honor. For the next hour, Mills delivered a closing argument that seemed less confident than her opening had been. She emphasized the circumstantial evidence against Julian, the suspicious timing of his trades, and the testimony of witnesses who claimed he had boasted about inside information. But she made no mention of Martin Kelly or other Meridian employees who might have had similar trading patterns. When Davidson rose for the defense's closing, his approach was aggressive. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, the prosecution has presented a case built on coincidence, innuendo, and the testimony of witnesses with clear motives to lie. What they haven't presented is actual evidence that my client used inside information. He paced in front of the jury box. And now we learn that there may be evidence the prosecution chose not to share. Evidence that could point to other individuals who had better access to inside information than Julian Cross ever did. Objection, Mills called out. Counsel is referring to matters not in evidence. Sustained, Celeste ruled. Mr. Davidson, confine your arguments to the evidence presented in court. Davidson nodded. The fact remains, ladies and gentlemen, that the prosecution has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Julian Cross committed the crimes he's charged with. They've shown that he made successful trades. They've shown that he made money. But being successful is not a crime. Making money is not a crime. He returned to stand beside Julian. What we have here is a case of envy and opportunism. My client's colleagues resented his success. The prosecution saw a chance to make headlines by going after a high-profile investor, and Julian Cross became the perfect scapegoat for everyone involved. When both sides had finished their closing arguments, Celeste addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard all the evidence in this case. It is now your responsibility to deliberate and reach a verdict. The question before you is whether the prosecution has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed the crimes with which he is charged. She proceeded to give them detailed instructions on the law, explaining the elements of securities fraud and insider trading, the concept of reasonable doubt, and their duties as jurors. You are excused to begin your deliberations, she concluded. Court is adjourned until the jury reaches a verdict. As the jury filed out, Celeste caught Julian looking at her, a mixture of hope and resignation in his eyes. She maintained her judicial mask, giving no hint of her own tumultuous feelings. In her chambers, Celeste tried to focus on other cases, but her mind kept returning to Julian, to his testimony, to the flash drive, to the years they had lost. Hours passed. Evening approached. Still no word from the jury. Just as Celeste was preparing to send them home for the night, Bill knocked on her door. The jury has a question, Judge, he said, handing her a note. The note read, Can we see the trading records for Martin Kelly that were mentioned during the trial? Celeste frowned. Those records hadn't been entered into evidence. Davidson had mentioned them in his closing, but the jury couldn't consider information not properly presented during the trial. She wrote her response. You may only consider evidence that was properly admitted during the trial. Another hour passed. Then Bill returned. The jury has reached a verdict, Judge. The courtroom filled quickly as word spread. Julian sat at the defense table, his face composed but his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Mills and her team looked tense, aware that their case had been weakened by the revelations about withheld evidence. All rise, Bill announced as Celeste entered. Be seated, she said. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. What say you? On the count of securities fraud, we find the defendant, Julian Cross, not guilty. A ripple of reaction passed through the courtroom. Julian closed his eyes briefly. On the count of insider trading, we find the defendant, Julian Cross, not guilty. This time the reaction was louder. Julian's shoulders sagged with relief. The jury has spoken, Celeste said. Julian Cross, you are free to go. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in noise and movement. Reporters rushed for the doors, eager to file their stories. Julian was surrounded by his legal team, receiving handshakes and congratulations. Celeste gathered her papers and left the bench, her part in the drama seemingly over. But in her chambers, as she removed her robe, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," she called. Richardson entered, looking grim. "Just got word from the U.S. Attorney's office. They're opening an investigation into Sandra Mills and her handling of evidence in the Cross case. Seems those trading records she didn't think were relevant paint a very different picture of what happened at Meridian Capital." "Martin Kelly?" Celeste asked. Richardson nodded. "And others? Looks like Cross might have been set up after all, just like he claimed." "Justice was served then," Celeste said quietly. "This time," Richardson agreed. "But it was a close call." "Too close." He fixed her with a serious look. "You did well under difficult circumstances, Warren, but let's not have a repeat of this situation." "No, sir," she agreed. "I don't think we will." After Richardson left, Celeste sat at her desk, emotionally drained. The case was over. Julian was free. The truth, or at least part of it, had come out. So why did she feel so unsettled? Perhaps because the most important questions remained unanswered. Not about the case, but about Julian, about why he had left 7 years ago, about what he had meant in his testimony when he spoke of making the biggest mistake of my life, about whether there was anything left between them worth salvaging. As Celeste gathered her things to leave, Marie appeared in the doorway. "Judge Warren, there's someone who wants to see you. I told him you don't take visitors after court, but he's very persistent." Celeste knew who it was without asking. "It's all right, Marie. Send him in." Julian entered, no longer the confident defendant, but a man who looked both relieved and uncertain. "Hello, Celeste," he said softly. This time she didn't correct him. "Hello, Julian. I wanted to thank you," he said, "for being fair, for not recusing yourself when you could have, for giving me the chance to clear my name." "I was just doing my job," she replied. "The jury made their decision based on the evidence." Julian stepped closer. "We both know there was more to it than that. Evidence that didn't make it into court. Evidence that someone made sure you saw. So he knew about the flash drive." "I can't discuss that," Celeste said carefully. "You don't have to," Julian assured her. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what you must have gone through, the ethical dilemma, the pressure." He was standing in front of her desk now, his eyes searching her face. 7 years ago, I walked away from the best thing in my life. I told myself it was ambition, that I needed to make something of myself before I could be worthy of you. But the truth is, I was scared." "Scared of what?" Celeste asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of failing, of not being enough. You were so brilliant, so destined for greatness. I felt like I was holding you back." He shook his head. "It was stupid and selfish. I hurt you, and I've regretted it every day since." Celeste stood, needing to move, to put some distance between them. "It's been 7 years, Julian. We're different people now." "Are we?" he asked. "Because when I saw you in that courtroom, when our eyes met for the first time in 7 years, I felt exactly the same way I did the day I fell in love with you." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest and frightening in its intensity. "You left without saying goodbye," Celeste said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "You disappeared from my life as if our relationship meant nothing. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Julian's face crumpled with regret. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But these past weeks, seeing you again, watching you command that courtroom with such integrity and strength, it reminded me of everything I threw away." He took a step closer. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Celeste. I'm not even asking for another chance. I just needed you to know the truth, that leaving you was the worst mistake I ever made, and that I never stopped loving you." Celeste felt tears threatening. She turned away, unwilling to let him see how deeply his words affected her. "You should go," she said. "This isn't appropriate." "I know," Julian agreed. "But before I go, there's something I want you to have." He placed a small package on her desk. "It's not much, just something I've been working on while waiting for the trial. A way to make sense of everything that happened, before and now." With that, he turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Whatever you decide, Celeste, Know that seeing you again, even under these circumstances, has been the best thing that's happened to me in 7 years." And then he was gone, leaving Celeste alone with the package on her desk. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Then, slowly, she unwrapped it. Inside was a leather-bound journal. On the cover, embossed in gold, were the words, "To the judge who saved me." With trembling hands, she opened it to the first page, where a handwritten dedication read, "For the only woman who ever saw me clearly, even when I didn't deserve it." Celeste sank into her chair, the journal open in her lap. It was filled with Julian's handwriting, pages and pages of it, not a formal manuscript, but a personal account. His story, their story. She began to read, losing track of time as Julian's words painted a picture of regret, growth, and enduring love, of a young man who had lost his way, but found himself again in the most unexpected place, standing before the woman he had wronged, ready to face judgment. The light outside her window had faded to dusk, when a knock at the door brought her back to the present. "Come in," she called, hastily wiping away tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. Marie entered with a stack of files. "Sorry to interrupt, Judge, but these need your signature before tomorrow." "Of course," Celeste said, composing herself. "Just leave them there." Marie placed the files on the desk, then hesitated. "Judge Warren, are you all right?" Celeste managed a smile. "Yes, Marie, I'm fine. Just processing everything that happened." "It was quite a case," Marie agreed. "Oh, and before I forget, your docket for next week was updated. You've got a new case that got bumped up. The file's on top there." "Thank you, Marie," Celeste said. "Have a good evening." After Marie left, Celeste glanced at the new file, curious what case had been added to her already full schedule. She opened it, then froze as she saw the name of the defendant, James Warren, her father. The man who had walked out on her and her mother when Celeste was just 10 years old. The man she hadn't seen or spoken to in 20 years, charged with perjury in a federal investigation. Celeste closed the file, her heart pounding. First Julian, now her father. The past wasn't done with her yet. She looked down at the journal in her lap, at Julian's words of love and regret, then at the file containing charges against the father who had abandoned her. 2 men who had left her, 2 men now seeking judgment. Celeste stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline as night fell over the city. Her city, where she had built a life, a career, a reputation for fairness and strength. What would tomorrow bring? Would she call Julian, give him a chance to explain in person? Would she recuse herself from her father's case, or face him as she had faced Julian? The answers weren't clear yet, but for the first time in 7 years, Celeste felt something she had thought was lost forever: hope. With a deep breath, she gathered her things, tucked Julian's journal carefully into her bag, and left her chambers, ready to face whatever came next. Not just as Judge Warren, but as Celeste. A woman who had found her strength by standing firm when the past came calling. A woman who now held the gavel to not just one, but 2 futures that were inextricably linked with her own.